deep within the misty wetlands of Montana, where even the strongest creatures can meet their match, a massive grizzly bear found himself trapped, helpless, sinking deeper with every desperate struggle. But when a lone man stumbled across the scene and did the unthinkable, a chain of events began that no one could have predicted. What the bear did next not only defied every instinct we thought we understood, it revealed a side of nature few humans have ever witnessed. Stay with us, because this story is about to change everything you believe about courage, gratitude, and the hidden heart of the wild. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the incredible true stories of survival, hope, and nature's most powerful secrets. The swamp was alive with the thick hum of insects, the sharp cries of unseen birds, and the slow, sinister bubbling of trapped water. Jack Donovan adjusted the straps on his backpack and pushed through the knee-deep mire, each step a struggle against the sucking mud. A wildlife photographer by passion and a field guide by trade, Jack had learned to move silently through places like this. But nothing prepared him for what he saw that morning. Ahead, barely visible through the tangled reeds and mist, a hulking form thrashed violently. A grizzly bear, massive, soaked in mud up to his chest, fought for his life. The bear's claws shredded the water, sending up muddy geysers. His roars, usually the sound of power, were now thick with panic. Every movement dragged him deeper. The swamp was winning. Jack froze, his heart hammering. Logic screamed, "Turn around, leave, this isn't your fight." But something else, something older than fear, rooted him in place. The bear wasn't hunting. He wasn't attacking. He was dying. Jack scanned the area. No other humans in sight. No ranger station nearby. No help coming. It was him or no one. He edged forward, careful not to splash, careful not to provoke. At this distance, if the bear thrashed free, Jack could be torn apart in seconds. But Jack saw it in the bear's eyes, a wild, desperate plea. Not for food. Not for blood. For life. Jack dropped his pack. His hands shook as he fumbled for the rope he always carried. The bear's struggling slowed, exhaustion setting in. His head sank lower, snout barely above the muddy waterline, his breath coming in hoarse, bubbling gasps. "Easy, big guy," Jack whispered, as if words could reach across the vast, primal gulf between them. He tossed one end of the rope toward the bear, praying it would land close enough, praying the bear would understand, or at least not panic. The rope landed, coiling near the bear's forepaws. Jack dug his heels into the swamp and began pulling with every ounce of strength he had. The rope tightened. The bear heaved. Mud slurped and sucked at his bulk. For a moment, Jack thought he had failed, that he was only prolonging the inevitable. And then, with a roar that shook the reeds, the bear surged forward, scrambling onto a firmer patch of ground, collapsing just inches from Jack's feet. Both man and beast lay gasping for breath, steam rising from their soaked bodies into the morning mist. Jack didn't move. Neither did the bear. Two creatures, separated by species, by fear, by an entire history of violence, bound in that instant by something no one would ever be able to explain. But what the bear did next would leave Jack, and the world, speechless. The air between them crackled with something Jack couldn't name. The grizzly, mud-soaked, panting, colossal, lifted his great head and locked eyes with Jack. For a heartbeat, the entire swamp seemed to fall silent. No birds. No insects. No wind. Only the heavy sound of two survivors breathing the same damp, heavy air. Jack didn't move. Every survival instinct he had was screaming inside him, telling him that proximity to a wild bear, especially one just rescued, exhausted and confused, was asking for death. But the bear didn't lunge. Didn't roar. Instead, he simply stared. Jack could see the beast's body trembling from exhaustion. Deep gashes marred his legs, where the swamp's hidden branches had clawed at him. His massive chest rose and fell in shuddering gasps, and his eyes, dark, liquid, ancient, were not filled with rage. They were filled with something Jack never expected to see. Recognition. Awareness. The bear, Jack realized with a shiver, knew what had happened. Knew who had helped him. Slowly, Jack backed away a few steps, hands open, showing he meant no threat. His boots slurped against the mud, but he kept his movements smooth and deliberate. The bear followed him, not aggressively, but limping, dragging his weight over to firmer ground with agonizing effort. Jack's mind raced. What do I do? What happens now? If he turned his back, could he be attacked? If he stayed, would he die here, alone and nameless in the swamp? And yet somehow, he couldn't bring himself to flee. Something about this bear, this impossible connection forged in the heart of desperation, held him frozen to the spot. The bear, Jack would later call him Mika, for the way the morning sun caught flecks of gold in his muddied fur, stood just yards away. He sat heavily on his haunches, steam rising from his soaked body. He lifted his great head and released a long, low huff, not a threat, but a sound Jack could only describe as acceptance. Permission. Acknowledgement. Jack found a fallen log nearby and sat down, his legs shaking too hard to stand. He pulled a protein bar from his pocket, unwrapped it, and took a trembling bite. He laughed under his breath, a dry, disbelieving sound. I must be out of my mind, he muttered. The bear huffed again, deep and slow, like a giant exhaling the weight of the world. For nearly an hour, they sat there, man and bear, in a silence that was somehow more profound than any conversation Jack had ever had. He knew he couldn't stay forever. He knew the swamp wasn't finished with either of them. But for now, they shared something unbreakable. A bond stitched not with words, but with survival, with trust earned at the sharp edge of death. And somewhere deep inside Jack, a terrible, wonderful realization began to take root: saving the bear had been just the beginning. Because what Mika was about to do next would defy every rule of nature Jack had ever believed in. The mist thickened over the swamp as the sun climbed higher, bathing the reeds in a soft golden haze. Jack checked the time on his watch, nearly midday. He needed to get moving. Out here alone, even a minor injury could turn fatal if night fell. And there was no guarantee Mika, the massive grizzly, would remain this oddly calm forever. Jack rose slowly, carefully avoiding sudden movements. The bear watched him with those steady, unreadable eyes. Jack turned toward the tree-line, where he knew firmer ground and the trail back to civilization waited. He expected, maybe even hoped, that the bear would stay behind. But as he limped forward, boots slipping in the thick mud, he heard it, the heavy, deliberate thud of paws following him. Jack froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. No, 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 he thought. If he charges now, I'm finished. He turned slowly. Mika stood a few yards behind, his massive head tilted slightly. Studying Jack, not like prey, but like a companion, Jack took another step forward. Mika followed. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't aggression. It was loyalty. Like a shadow, the grizzly limped after Jack, keeping his distance but never letting him out of sight. At first, Jack thought it must be coincidence. Maybe the bear was simply heading in the same direction, seeking higher ground. But mile after mile, hour after hour, Mika remained close. When Jack stopped to catch his breath, the bear stopped too. When Jack veered around dangerous pockets of swamp, Mika mirrored the movements, following the safe path. When Jack crossed shallow icy streams, Mika waited, lumbering across only after Jack had made it to the other side. At one point, Jack stumbled on a hidden root, crashing hard onto his knees with a grunt of pain. He stayed there, stunned, cursing the stubbornness that had driven him so deep into the wild alone. He heard the slow approach of the bear behind him, felt the earth tremble slightly under Mika's weight. Jack squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But it didn't come. Instead, he felt a heavy, warm breath against his back, a low, almost questioning grunt. He turned his head slightly and saw Mika standing there, inches away. Not attacking. Just waiting. Offering his presence. Offering something Jack couldn't quite name. Strength. Companionship. Jack swallowed hard, emotions battering him harder than the cold. "You're not leaving me behind, huh?" he whispered, voice cracking. The bear blinked slowly, steam rising from his nose. Jack pushed himself upright again, using a branch as a crutch, and kept moving, now with Mika pacing him through the broken land. Together. Hours later, as the sun sagged low over the swamp and cast long, jagged shadows across the land, Jack spotted it, the old ranger outpost, its rusted roof gleaming faintly in the distance. Civilization. Safety. Jack felt tears prick his eyes, not just from relief, but from something heavier. He turned to Mika, who stood watching silently, his huge frame silhouetted against the dying light. The bear had saved him as much as Jack had saved the bear. Two lost creatures, both dragged from the jaws of death, carrying each other to the finish line. Jack took a hesitant step toward the outpost. Mika didn't follow. He simply stood there, still, proud, wild, a silent farewell written in every line of his battered body. Jack knew, deep in his heart, that if he crossed that final stretch toward the world of men, he would be leaving Mika behind forever. Could Jack bear to walk away from the wild brother he never expected and never deserved? Jack hesitated, his boots half buried in the mud. The ranger station loomed ahead, a rusty, weather-beaten building with a flickering solar light barely visible against the falling twilight. Safety. Warmth. Human voices. A world he once belonged to. Behind him, standing silent as stone, was Mika. The bear's massive chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. His dark eyes glinted with something that could almost be called understanding. Jack turned fully to face him. In the fading light, the bear looked older, weathered, sacred, not like the fierce predators he had captured so many times with his camera. Not like the raw power nature documentaries loved to glorify. Mika stood there like an ancient, breathing monument to everything wild and untamed, everything Jack had forgotten he needed. Jack's throat tightened painfully. What words could possibly bridge the gulf between them? What gesture could repay a debt carved in blood, mud, and silent loyalty? There weren't any. Some bonds were too big for language. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No growl. No roar. Just a heavy, aching silence. Finally, Jack raised one hand, slow, deliberate, palm open in the oldest sign of peace a human could give. Mika tilted his great head slightly, almost as if acknowledging the gesture. Then, with a huff that ruffled the reeds at his paws, the bear turned. He lumbered away into the misty trees, his massive form fading into the twilight like a ghost returning to the earth. Jack stood frozen, watching until the last glimpse of him disappeared. And then, Utterly alone, he stumbled toward the ranger station. Every step felt like tearing himself away from something ancient and irreplaceable. The rangers barely recognized him when he burst through the door, soaked, bleeding, wild-eyed. They moved quickly, wrapping him in blankets, radioing for medical evacuation, shoving hot coffee into his shaking hands. He answered their questions in a daze. No, he didn't know exactly where he had been trapped. Yes, he had gotten lost. No, he hadn't seen any other people. He said nothing about the bear. Some things were too sacred to explain. And how could he ever make them understand that out there in the heart of the swamp, he had found something stronger than survival? He had found trust where there should have been violence, mercy where there should have been death. And he had left a piece of his soul behind in the mud and mist. That night, as Jack lay in a stiff cot inside the ranger station, wrapped in warm layers, a nurse tending to his wounds, he closed his eyes and remembered it all, the desperate struggle, the lifeline of a rope through cold, thick water, the weight of another heartbeat following his in the wilderness. A tear slipped down Jack's cheek and vanished into the coarse wool blanket. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of human maps and human fear, Mika lived on, a breathing reminder that sometimes, the wild didn't just take. Sometimes, if you were brave, if you were lucky, the wild gave something back. Something you could never replace. But would the world ever believe that a man and a grizzly could share something purer than fear, something closer to love? Days turned into weeks. Jack healed, at least physically. The bruises faded. The stitches dissolved. And the color returned to his face. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. He couldn't explain it to the doctors. He couldn't explain it to the rangers. He barely managed to explain it to himself. No meat. No aggression. Once, a pair of ravens descended into the clearing, cackling as they circled low over the cub. Brutus rose like a storm and chased them off with a single roar. It was the first time in years he had bared his teeth for something other than himself. From her lab, Dr. Elena Vasquez rewound the footage over and over, a grizzly bear, a lone male, showing maternal behavior. It had never been documented. Not in North America, not in Europe, not in captivity, not in the wild. This wasn't an isolated act of mercy. This was a relationship. And it defied everything the textbook said was possible. Still, one question lingered in Elena's mind. How long could this last? A bear could not nurse a pup, could not teach it to hunt, could not raise it to adulthood. And yet, the pup didn't seem to care. He began following Brutus through the trees, stumbling over roots, falling into snowdrifts, yipping when the bear walked too fast. Brutus didn't scold, didn't push the pup away. Instead, he slowed down. Waited. One day, while rooting through wet earth for edible roots, Brutus tore through a patch of bark and exposed a tiny pocket of grubs. He stepped back and let the pup eat first. No growl. No threat. Just patience. Elena watched the moment unfold in stunned silence. A wild grizzly bear, a creature engineered by evolution to be solitary, territorial, and violent, had made room in his world for a fragile rival species. And not just made room, he had given part of himself to keep it alive. The pup, for his part, had stopped trembling. His ribs no longer showed. His eyes now followed Brutus with unblinking focus. He didn't just see a bear. He saw his world, the only warmth he'd known, the only safety he'd found. And somewhere inside that small, growing body, the first seeds of loyalty were beginning to take root. The kind that doesn't fade with seasons. The kind that shapes everything that comes next. The forest, for all its peace, never stayed still. Every story in the wild eventually turns. And for Brutus and the pup, the turn came with the wind. It started with a scent. Brutus was nosing along the edge of the clearing, the pup not far behind, clumsily chewing on a branch. When the wind shifted, Brutus froze. His massive head lifted, nostrils flared, ears rotated slowly. Then, a low growl, deep in his throat. The pup stopped moving. His instincts hadn't developed fully yet, but something in Brutus's posture triggered a reaction. He pressed low to the ground, ears flat. Brutus took 2 steps forward and looked toward the tree line. That's when the howls came. Low at first, then rising in eerie harmony. Long, drawn-out calls echoing through the timber. Wolves, a pack, and close. The pup perked up at the sound, but Brutus stepped in front of him, blocking his view. He didn't growl. He didn't charge. He just stood there, still and waiting. Minutes passed. Then, from the trees, they emerged, 5 wolves. Their coats were lean, mottled in shades of gray and brown. They came with caution, heads low, tails half-raised, every movement calculated. At their front, a female, older, scarred, eyes sharp with recognition. She stopped just short of Brutus and saw the pup. A sound escaped her that was half whine, half whimper, the raw sound of a mother who had thought her child dead. She moved. The other wolves tensed, but she brushed past them, approaching the pup who had once been hers. He squeaked and limped forward, tail wagging furiously, sniffing, crying, stumbling into her chest. She licked him over and over, shaking, whining, confirming what instinct had already told her, her son was alive. The moment should have been peaceful. But then came the impasse. The wolves looked up and saw Brutus. This wasn't right. This wasn't natural. Wolves and bears didn't share kills. They didn't share space. And they definitely didn't share cubs. The male wolf on the left bristled, stepping forward, baring teeth. Brutus didn't move. He stood between the pup and the pack, not aggressively, but unyielding. It wasn't a threat. It was a message: you will not hurt him. Not even unintentionally. The wolves hesitated, ears flicking, tails lowered. The alpha female turned her head and let out a single, short bark. The others stilled. Then, unbelievably, they accepted him. They sniffed the air, circled, cautious but calm, and then lay down. Not far, not close, but with the understanding that this wasn't a fight. Not today. The pup nestled again at his mother's side, looked back at Brutus, and padded over, curling beneath his massive foreleg, just for a moment, then returned to the pack. It was an act of translation, of transition, of loyalty to both. From her lab, Elena watched the scene unfold on camera, hands trembling. She had feared this moment, feared it would end in blood, in misunderstanding. Instead, it ended in something else entirely: acceptance. The forest had rewritten the rules again. And Brutus, once an outsider, once a ghost of the Sierra, now stood, impossibly, not as a predator, but as a part of the pack. The peace didn't last. Not because the wolves changed, they didn't. Not because Brutus changed, he remained as constant as stone. But because the wild is never without its predators. And that spring, another hunter returned to the Sierra. The cameras saw him first, a lean, muscular mountain lion moving through the trees like smoke, silent, calculated, deadly. He was a veteran, an old male scarred by winters and rivalries, his jaw crooked from an old injury. He'd been forced from his last range by a younger lion and now roamed alone, hungry and bold. In the ecosystem of the Sierra Nevada, mountain lions were top-tier predators, and they were known to kill both wolf pups and young bears when food was scarce. This one had already taken down 2 deer and left one partially buried, a sign of returning dominance. And now he had scented something new. Something strange. A mixed territory, wolves and a bear. Together. Unnatural? The lion didn't care. All he knew was that where confusion reigned, opportunity lived. He approached the glade cautiously, wind in his favor, steps ghost-like over snow-soft earth. Inside, the wolves rested. The pup, stronger now though still small, dozed between his mother and Brutus. The others lay scattered, tired from a morning hunt. Brutus was still, but his nose twitched. Then his ears flicked back. He rose instantly. A silent growl vibrated through his chest, the kind that didn't echo but carried like thunder through the ground. The wolves stood at once, hackles lifted, tails high. And from the treeline, the lion appeared. Golden coat shining, muscles tight, shoulders rolling like a wave. He didn't charge. Not yet. He was testing them. Brutus stepped forward. The lion stopped. 2 predators, 2 legends of their kind, facing off. The wolves flanked Brutus, spreading wide, not attacking, but not backing down. It was the pup, now crouched behind his surrogate guardian, who seemed to center them all. The lion hissed, tail lashing. He lunged forward, 3 paces, sharp and sudden. Brutus didn't move. He reared slightly, pushing the snow behind him with a roar that tore through the clearing like a crack of thunder. The wolves joined in, not howling, but growling in chorus. He became a name whispered with respect among conservationists. Not because he sought attention, but because he understood something most had forgotten, that to save the wild, you had to let it change you first. Every year, on the anniversary of that impossible day, Jack returned to the swamp. He always came alone. He never brought a camera. He never expected to see Ma again. But he came anyway, to remember. To give thanks. To keep the bond alive. Some years he thought he heard it, the low, distant huff rolling across the water. Some years he saw no sign, heard no sound. And still, he came. Because some promises don't fade. Some debts can never be repaid. They can only be honored. In silence. In service. In stubborn, unwavering love. On his final journey back to the swamp, Jack moved slower. His joints ached. His breath caught in his chest more easily now. But he still smiled. Still marveled at the way the swamp greeted him like an old friend, mist curling low, birds rising in slow arcs over the water, trees swaying with the secret music of life.